everybody. Welcome back to a Flip in the Barrel podcast, the podcast where we dive deep into the stories of energy leaders across our industry and find out more about their career and life journey. And today we have the pleasure of interviewing Nikki Martin, who is the president and CEO of EnergyGeo Alliance. She currently lives in Houston, Texas. She's a dual career and a mother of two. She also recently won and was nominated as an Influential Women in Energy by Heart Energy, which we actually got to see you, Nikki, a few weeks back. We went to the luncheon. It was fabulous. We look forward to this event every year where it just recognizes so many amazing women in our industry. And, again, congratulations. So inspiring. And I think we can dive a little bit more into your journey to see, how you got to where you are today and be part of, influential women in energy. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you so much for what you both are doing to really inspire more women to get into our industry and to keep the women that we have in our industry here and motivated about what they're doing and about the future of energy. It's really important. So grateful to you guys and flipping the barrel.
Thank you so much, Nikki. That means a lot coming from you. And I have to say, I find it so interesting, your upbringing. I had no idea you were from Alaska. And when we spoke, I remember you saying that it's like y'all grew the best potatoes and cabbages in the world, which seemed like such an interesting fact. I'd love for our listeners to know a little bit more about, your life growing up in Alaska. You mentioned your parents were kind of like hippie. They traveled across the U.S. to go live in the North, which is very interesting given the dynamics of Alaska. I've been there once. The time frame of it being dark to light is very hard to get used to. I can only imagine what that was like. So please tell us how that also influenced you to be the person you are today and have that drive and influence of growing up in such a farming type community in Alaska.
Yeah. Well, when you know nothing else growing up in Alaska, the darkness doesn't really affect you. But once I left and came back, it did. But yes, my parents were hippies, you could say. They were part of the kind of North to Alaska movement in the 70s, but they were yuppies by the time I was born. But Alaska is a very young state. So I was realizing when I was born, it was only 24 years old. So here we are in the South, right? And there's all this great history, long history of the United States, having been formed here. These states have been here a long time. Alaska's really young still, even today. So at the time, 24 years old, the state was when I was born. So there was really a very much a spirit of ingenuity in the community. I was a first generation Alaskan, like many of my peers and friends were, because it was so young. And there was just so much creativity, invention, a real pioneering spirit. People were homesteading still. So there's just really this first to discover and create that was alive in Alaska. The Alyeska pipeline, I don't know if you know the history or you were able to visit it at all when you were there, Jamie, but they have this motto. It's actually set in a statue there in Valdez. They didn't know it couldn't be done. They didn't know it couldn't be done. And that is exactly what embodies Alaska, the industry there, just this real pioneering spirit that anything is possible if we put our mind and kind of grit to it.
Mm. Thank you, Nikki. I don't know much about Alaska, so I've learned a lot already. And I don't think we've ever had anyone on the podcast that was like born and raised there. So you're the first. And, what I wanted to know a little bit is, you did decide to study political science. That was kind of your passion. That's what what you actually ended up going into. And you moved far away from home to go to school. However, when I think of Alaska, I think of the slopes, oil and gas, and it's just such a big industry there. Was that at all influential for you of thinking, hey, maybe I want to stay here in Alaska and look at, the petroleum industry? Or, how did oil and gas kind of play into your background? And then why did you decide to study political science and move away from home?
Yeah, absolutely. My full intent was to move back to Alaska and be in the oil and gas industry. At the time when I graduated high school, I thought I was going to be an engineer so I could come back and work on the Alaska natural gas line. That still doesn't exist today. So that was really a pipe dream. But yeah, growing up in Alaska, you really appreciate the oil and gas industry. It's not oil and gas or the environment. It's both, right? Most of my friends' parents worked in the industry. It's a significant part of the state's economy. And so you really understand the importance of energy and the importance of the industry. So I was already always drawn to it, but I thought my path to get there would be a little bit more varied than it was. So I ended up going to college, majored in mechanical engineering to start with. I got weeded out by the weed out course, statics. Engineering's not for me, but I was really good at writing in political science. So that was really easy. It came natural to me. So I ended up changing my major to poli-sci, but it was very clear, not law. I almost prefaced everything with that. I am not law. I'm not pre-law. I'm just poli-sci. So thought I would be able to wind up in a political kind of public policy position where I would be able to influence energy policy, natural resource development, and really get around that kind of center of it's not environment or energy, it's both. And you can really ensure a sustainable community, a sustainable economy by supporting both. They're not mutually exclusive.
Well, you just mentioned that one thing that you were saying, like it wouldn't be law, but if I look back at your story, when you ended up in DC, you decided that working full time and the nighttime and like even the crowd you were in didn't really fit like that poli-sci major that you thought about. Yes. And one night you decided to quit what you were doing and go and study law at Lewis and Clark Law School in Portland. So you ended up changing your mind. Now, what I like about this story is a lot of times when we're going through college, we really don't know what we want. And we say things like such as you are saying now, like, I'm not going to do law. I actually started in poli-sci as well, first semester, and then I swapped. So, and I really thought like same thing, like you don't really know. I'd love to hear like your advice too on people that are going through that transition. And also, what did you learn from this experience? Because that's a big step to just like go ahead and quit and say like, I'm going to sign up for law school.
Yeah, and it was actually one of my very first mentors. He was the Senate president in Alaska at the time, Ben Stevens. He actually encouraged me to go to law school. So I was in my first job out of college, first real job out of college, working in the Alaska State Legislature. And he was the one who planted the idea that I could do more than being a legislative or congressional staffer. But the way I went that route was to go to DC first and try working in the U.S. Senate for Senator Ted Stevens. And Ted Stevens at the time had this program where he would help support his staff that decided to pursue law school in the evening. And I went to the accepted students program at George Washington one night. They had a reception and I had a long day on the Hill, went there late in the evening. Traffic was terrible. It was DC. I wasn't used to Houston traffic yet. And had a hard time finding parking, got in there. Everybody's in suits like I am, but everyone starts talking about like who they work for. Well, I work for this senator, or I do that, or the Speaker of the House. And I'm like, well, I work for the Senate President Pro Tem, but who cares? Like, this is terrible. And it was kind of the positioning that was already happening amongst the students made me not want to be there. And I thought law school is going to be stressful enough. I want to seek out maybe a different opportunity. So I drove back to the Hill late at night, went into the office, nobody was there, and Googled #1 environmental law school. And it was Lewis and Clark Law School in Portland, Oregon. Never heard of it, didn't have any connections to Portland, sent a late application, got in, and that's where I ended up going. And a big driver for that was, again, this intersection and interest in public policy, and really about how can we create opportunities and ensure that energy and natural resource development are able to continue to do what they need to do to sustain a growing world population at the same time as ensuring the environment around us is a part of that. And I was seeing increasingly environmental activist organizations using the law really as a powerful tool to prevent and impede development. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to go where they study and I want to learn what they know. So I know what kind of the next angle is, so I can help use that to open up doors instead of close them.
Your story is all about taking action. And, when something doesn't feel right, or you don't feel like you're in the right crowd or environment, you go home that evening and you make a change, and I think that's what's so remarkable. And it's a trait of a lot of successful people is they act on doing things. And because a lot of people could have felt like you and they just stayed there like, oh, maybe it'll get better in 5 years. And then they're 50 and they're like, oh, I never moved or I never changed. And so I think a lot of your story is like, you know exactly where you want to go. You see that goalpost and you just act on it. And so I love that you mentioned that. You know, after you graduated, you started kind of like your first job after, and you mentioned that you felt very underused. Just like the position that you get usually when you first start off, you're like, oh, man, I could do so much more. You were doing like a lot of secretary work, a lot of paperwork, and you know, you just realize that how do I express this? Because, you know, early on, I think a lot of us feel this way at some point, like we all studied, we're eager to go into the workforce. And then you're like, oh, I went to school for this to like file paper. You know, what kind of lessons have you learned on that? Because you do always get the answer of like, be patient and learn from people, you know? So tell me a little bit about like how you took this lesson.
Yeah. And I think it's absolutely true universally. And if it's not true of you, like, great. I want to study and admire you. You graduate and you feel so accomplished, degreed, and I'm ready to, offer my contribution to the world based on my significant degree, right? And so I graduated. This was out of University of South Carolina with my poli-sci degree. Went and worked first job again, Senator Stevens in Alaska, and I was given the front desk assignment, and I had a chip on my shoulder, thought this is below me. I should be working public policy. This is, I can contribute more than processing the mail and answering phone calls. And really, I'm going to be honest here. I was struggling with this. I was in Juneau, Alaska. And one night I was actually reading the Bible, and I came across this story about Nehemiah, who was the cupbearer to the king of Persia. And by doing the smallest of tasks with diligence and excellence, he ultimately earned the trust of the most powerful person in the country, right? And so it really changed my perspective and said, I'm really at a position where I'm a gatekeeper for this individual. And it turned out we were in one of the most pivotal sessions, most pivotal periods of time in Alaska's history. We were once again considering changes to tax policy on oil production in the state. We had 2, maybe 3 special sessions. And because of my change in perspective, and really, I'm going to do everything with excellence, whether it's organizing caucus meetings, whether it's making sure the snack trays are the best possible, whether it's bringing fireballs and updated Stanley Cup scores to my boss, at 11 p.m. on the Senate floor, like I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it with excellence. And really, because of that change of perspective, I got access to him and to the entire leadership when there were no other staff around. The staff were all sent back to their home offices, and I was one of the only staffers through the special sessions. And so because of that, I earned their confidence and was kind of in on the conversations, in on the strategy, got to have some late nights sitting around. I remember drinking kokanee beer, never had kokanee before, but that was one of them. Sitting around drinking and talking strategy and history and Alaska politics. So I really got this quick, short course, accelerated experience that would have never been possible if I saw a more traditional, senior level role. I wouldn't have been included in that. And because of that, this man ultimately became one of my largest mentors, largest proponents, and he's the one who got me on this trajectory to law school. So he ultimately changed the course of my career and my life. And I'm not sure that would have happened if I didn't have that change in perspective.
What I really like about what you shared is how that change in your mindset can really just change your entire career, like it did for you. And that kind of brings me to my next question, which is like a change in perspective on what oil and gas does for the environment. You grew up in Alaska. You saw firsthand like the amazing, beautiful countryside. When I went there, I was absolutely astonished. The animals, like you see moose on the side of the road, you see caribou, you see like all of these animals, and it's incredible. And then across the way, they're drilling for oil and gas, right? And there's I'm sure you saw a lot of activism, like you've already talked about. That's why you wanted to go to law, because you wanted to learn that. What do we tell those people who are struggling with that environmental piece of, well, oil and gas is very important for the industry, but I'm an environmentalist and like I don't want the environment to be impacted. You and I both know that we do everything we can in the oil and gas industry to ensure that doesn't happen. However, how can we talk to these people who are feeling this way? Because, a big part of what we do is promote positivity and the energy place and all the great things that we do. However, sometimes it can be very difficult in these conversations on, how do you talk to somebody who has such a strong mindset against the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, and this was actually part of the conversation we just had last week at Sarah Week. I had the opportunity to be on a panel about attracting and retaining talent in the oil and gas industry. And one of my points was we love in the industry to fact to death, right? We have all kinds of facts. We're armored with all sorts of reasons and rationale why we will still need petroleum and natural gas for decades to come, and why it's good, and how it's transforming communities around the world in a very environmentally and responsible and sustainable way as well. But if you can't communicate that credibly and with passion, it's going to fall on deaf ears. And so I think we really have to connect to the passion people in our industry currently have. And I think that's one thing about Alaska that's very different, and why I had a very positive perspective of the industry coming from Alaska. When a quarter of the state citizens are working in the oil and gas industry, and those people are people who love and thrive and play in the environment. It's not, again, either or. As both Ben and Ted Stevens would say, conservation and development are not mutually exclusive. You have to have both, and we do them both very well in Alaska. And so having that kind of at the core, it's like I had that understanding and knowledge that this is possible. And so I think really being able to tap into current workforce passion for what they do, and being able to display and communicate that is one way of really motivating. Because what the other side, if you will, those organizations who are really aimed at preventing any further oil and gas development, excluding exploration, getting it off the table, they are really great at sharing information passionately, right? It's a lot of misinformation, but they do it passionately, powerfully. They're able to cut through the noise. And so we have to be able to do that as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And we need individuals like yourself, like you mentioned, that can break all those unconscious biases or just all the negativity that takes up the noise that they just focus on in the news and the media, et cetera, and just be advocates that, there could be a little bit of a balance here, and that, Alaska's a good example of it. Just to get back into kind of your career journey, something that was really interesting when we heard it was, your spouse also is in the industry, and, he got a job at Halliburton while you guys were in Alaska, and he was moved to Houston. So this basically left you with no real choice but to quit your job at the time and follow him, which I would say a lot of women do this at some point in their career if their husbands get a great opportunity. And so they follow, and you kind of put, quote unquote, a pause on your career to help out your partner. And that's something that a lot of women are willing to do, and men are willing to do for their spouse as well. But, you moved to Houston. You didn't have any family or relatives that were living there at the time. You have two children, which I believe were born in Houston. And just there was a little bit of that struggle of, you went to school, you went to law school, you were passionate about what you were doing. And all of a sudden, it goes into just, you got to restart and rebuild yourself. But what's really interesting is that while you were in Houston, a few years passed, and you went to work for a company which turned into EnergyGeo, International Association of Geophysical Contractors. Yeah. And, you started working there, and a year and a half into it, you were offered to become their CEO, which is like, wow, you took this big risk, you paused your career, which a lot of people are worried to even take a year break because it's going to ruin their career forever. While as this actually gave you this opportunity that maybe you would have never had if you stayed in Alaska. So it kind of worked out for you. But two questions on just setting this for the listeners of the storyline. A, how did you deal with just your time when you kind of take a pause and, you went to school, you're ambitious, and all of a sudden you kind of pause, how do you handle that? And second, when they appointed you as CEO or even offered it to you, you were shocked. You said, I didn't even think I was qualified for this kind of job. And they kind of had to convince you, So tell us a little bit about that story.
Yes, absolutely. So hindsight's 2020, right? We always say that hindsight's 2020. I don't think you can find anyone who will say there was a time when I was forced out of my comfort zone and it wasn't for my betterment. I regretted it, right? So this was definitely a time when I was forced out of my comfort zone. Alaska is what I knew. Alaska is always where I thought, as we said earlier, I would end up working in the industry. And I was in my dream job. I was in regulatory and legal affairs, working for the Alaska Oil and Gas Association. And this was it. I've reached the pinnacle of my career, I thought, right? I was very active, working various issues, including hydraulic fracturing regulations, a lot of issues federally on Alaska's North Slope. And I just loved it. I loved our members, I loved everything about it. But this opportunity came up for my husband, and it was too good to pass by. And it was one of those moments where you have to say, we're a team, we're partnering together. I'm going to take a leap that there's going to be an opportunity for me there that I will love. And you know what? Just as you said, it ended up being the best opportunity, better than I could have ever fathomed or imagined. I remember you've had those various exercises kind of growing up. I think this was in law school, actually, where somebody said, oh, close your eyes and imagine what you're doing, when you're older. And I'm really passionate about connecting people to the land. And I didn't really know what that meant, but I was like, growing up in Alaska, you have this almost a constitutional principle that people should benefit from the resources within their land, that the land is there to provide for them, to meet their basic needs, whether that's hunting or fishing, subsistence or energy. It's there for the benefit of the people, to have it at maximum yield, and at the same time ensure the environment is thriving as well. And so I had this real sense of, I want to connect people to the land so they can benefit from it. Never heard of geoscience, no idea what geophysics is. Lo and behold, this job comes from the International Association of Geophysical Contractors, long name at the time. And this is literally what they do. They use their ingenuity, their innovation, their technology to put eyes on the subsurface, whether it's offshore or onshore, to reveal what these vast resources are so people can benefit from them. So people can be connected to resources right under their feet. And I'm like, holy cow, this is the moment. I had no idea what this field was, but I'm super passionate about connecting people to energy. I'm very keen on this. So that got me started at IAGC. And it really was only 3 months since we moved and I started working there, but it felt like forever when you don't know what the future holds. So yeah, first when they gave me the offer to become president a year and a half into it, you're right. My first response was, I'm not qualified for this. I don't have the experience managing people. But the board saw something in me that they thought I had the potential. I had more potential than other candidates, and I might not have had the on paper experience, but they thought I had the ability to take the organization where it needed to go. So I really appreciated the confidence that they had in me. And one thing that I remember very clearly at the time when I was considering this was, a farmer never sows if he's watching the clouds or the wind. There's that kind of proverb that says that, right? If you're always waiting for the right circumstances, you're never going to jump at the opportunity. And I thought, I better go for it and trust that this is going to be the right path for me. And I haven't looked back.
What I see in you, and then I'm sure they saw in you, was your passion. Like, oh my gosh, it just bleeds out of you. So I can only imagine that they were like, oh, Nikki's gonna be perfect because she's so passionate. She's gonna win over everybody that she's speaking with. I mean, I'm sure that was their thought. What even makes this even more monumental is you were one of the first females in over 50 years to be appointed, which is kind of sad that it took 50 years, but it's still amazing at the same time. But to make things even a little bit more complicated, we would say is that they probably didn't have a lot of experience with somebody coming in that was also 6 weeks pregnant. And I think we all struggle with that when we find out we're pregnant. We're like, oh my God, when do I tell? How do I tell? What do I do? Is my job now at risk? the stress is like overwhelming, especially when you're taking on such a role that at first you felt like, well, man, am I even qualified for this? And then now you're like, well, I'm going to need some time off because, you know, a baby's going to come in 9 months. So how did you deal with this when you told them, like, what was the expectation? What happened? Did they have a maternity leave policy then? I'd love to hear this story from you and how you were over to obviously overcome all of it, but it'd be great to know kind of what happened at that time.
Yeah, it sort of felt like there were a few biological factors set against me.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
32 years old. I was young. I was the first female to lead any global energy association at that time. And so our members, to their credit, they were very supportive and they felt like they were so proud. Look at what we're doing. We're promoting diversity. We're putting this, female into a prominent position. Little did they know, as you said, I was 6 weeks pregnant. So I wasn't telling anybody yet. I knew it. My husband knew it. Nobody else knew it.
Yeah.
And so when we started to talk about this with the board chairman at the time, talk about my position, and I was looking at the terms of the contract and the offer, I said, do you have a maternity leave policy? And he couldn't ask me why, lawfully that's not allowed. So I made sure that there was a maternity leave policy written in. I put what it was, 12 weeks paid leave. And then 2.5 months later, I said, surprise.
Yes.
Oh my God.
I love it.
Baby. And that all that factored into that decision where it was weighing, am I ready for this? Is this the right time? Like, I'm growing a child. This might not be the right time for me. But again, like, if you're watching your circumstances, you might not ever act. And so it turned out really to be the best time in a lot of ways. I think as a mother, which you both are, it helps provide great perspective into what's important, what's material, and what's not, and has a way of really elevating your time to the issues that are most pertinent, that have the most impact, because you don't have time to waste on things that don't matter. And so for me, in a very short period of time, I was able to kind of cut through clutter and be like, well, I used to care about that. I don't anymore. I got
exactly
up here because I got a baby at home,
I love it. And I think what's amazing about that story, even when you told us about it, we were just like, oh my gosh, just because even without a promotion and you find out you're pregnant, you're like, oh, what's going to happen next? What are they going to say? But I can't even imagine, like, here's president and then I'm pregnant, So what I love though is that you did it, you owned it, and it worked out, and now you can prove to everybody that it's doable. And so here's the example. Don't worry about it. Don't sweat the small stuff, and you're gonna shine regardless.
Right.
So one of the last questions that we had for you was, what do you think will be the challenges and opportunities for the energy geoscience industry that EnergyGeo represents in the next, let's say, 5 years?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges for our industry now. So we are really at the front of the entire energy value chain. Whatever your preferred source of energy is, and what we call the energy evolution, it requires eyes on something going in, out, or through the ground. And that's simply not possible without geoscience. And so really we're the tip of the spear for exploration, for production, for development, for even low carbon solutions. Carbon capture and storage will have to heavily rely on the expertise of the energy geoscience and exploration industry. And so because of that, we're also the tip of the spear, or as a very large ENGO said at one time, the gateway drug for energy development. Nothing can happen but for us. So we have become really a linchpin in public policies around the world of whether development's going to happen or not. And because of that, our industry has faced extreme pressure, extreme external pressure. We're seeing increasingly exploration being put on the chopping block. UN just called for exploration to end by 2030. IEA's infamous roadmap to net zero caused there to be lots of headlines that we can't have any more exploration. This was in 2019, right? We can't have any more exploration if we're going to meet net zero goals. So there's a lot of negativity around what our industry does and a lot of misinformation about its requirement and it's really it being inherent to any future of energy for the world. And so really it comes down to our ability as an industry to coalesce around energizing policies, people, and perceptions for the future. And that's EnergyGeo's strategic plan right now. We need to make sure there are supportive policies in place that can attract and maintain the investment of the geoscience and exploration industry. And we have to continue to prioritize people, ensuring we're advancing health, safety, and environmental performance in our industry, but also prioritizing people in the workforce, ensuring we're able to motivate our current workforce and attract a future workforce. And all of those things are influenced heavily by the perception of our industry. We're not going to boil an ocean here, but we can pivot perceptions to ensure that people understand logically, rationale, the reason why we still need petroleum and natural gas, we still need geoscience for any source of energy, we still need exploration to bring energy optionality onto the table so countries can be secure in the world that they play geopolitically. And so there's a lot of reasons to be very excited about the future of this industry, but it really depends on how well we're able to coalesce, come together to really advance policies, people, and perceptions.
And I also think that our companies need to start investing in the marketing and branding of oil and gas. I don't know if you've witnessed or saw the big advertisement that was a national ad campaign that one of the energy companies posted about a family going in to deliver a child, and they went into a hospital that had nothing from oil and gas, and apparently it was completely empty. And they were like, "Where's the hospital?" And they're like, "Well, this is it, but nothing's here because everything's created with fossil fuels."
Yeah.
And so then everything started populating. The machines, the beds, all of the IVs, and everything started populating, and it started telling you where it came from.
Yes.
Those are the kind of things that we need. It's changing that perception in a way that impacts to what you said at the very beginning, something that touch and feel that people can relate to. I think it's so important.
Because they can't see. Energy is invisible, really, especially if you're sitting here where we are in energy rich Texas or anywhere in the Western world. Really, we're spoiled with energy. We're spoiled with energy access. It might be costly from time to time, but we have it, right? And so it's invisible. You just turn the switch on. You have this stuff. You have your phone. You and I know that this all takes a tremendous amount of petroleum derivatives to make it work and to power the world. But for the most part, the Western world is completely blind to this and ignorant to this. So the work that organizations like Flipping the Barrel and a lot of our U.S. Trade Association peers are doing to illuminate this is very important. But I also really value that as a global association, a global industry, we're able to have a global platform and talk about the needs of the developing world too. We heard at CERAWeek last week this very interesting statistic. So you usually hear like, oh, there's still 800 million people without access to electricity, and most of them are in sub-Saharan Africa. It's actually much more staggering. Over 3.5 billion people don't have reasonable, reliable access to energy, meaning they spend at least 56 days per year without any lights on, no electricity access. That is staggering. These people, that's almost half our population. These people deserve to watch their children thrive, grow, be educated, their communities and economies thrive. And that's going to take a tremendous amount of energy. And I'm very excited about what our industry is doing to make that possible and what they're doing to make energy possible.
Well, Nikki, thank you for sharing that stat, because you're right. A lot of times that's what we hear, sub-Sahara Africa. Oh, there's a bubble there that they don't have energy, but it really is staggering across the world, and even just the resources. So sharing this knowledge and getting out on platforms like Flipping the Barrel and other podcasts, we definitely hope that we hear more of your story and of what you're doing and what your company's doing, as I think it's just so great and something desperately needed. And we just want to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing today. I absolutely loved hearing about your growing up in Alaska. I didn't know that about you. I think that's so cool. And then just how you overcame so much and took so many risks. Oh my goodness, I couldn't imagine a year in taking that role as president president, and then, hey, I'm pregnant too. I mean, it's just really incredible. And you really shine the light on so much that women can do in this industry, and the support too, and the mentors. So thank you for coming on, Nikki. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Massiel. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Nikki.
Thanks, Nikki. And if you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. And we will tune in on the next one. Thank you.